Lots to say, of course, about Perek Chavdal. We're already into the Perek, and last we spoke, Kedarkenu, we learned about two psukim. Look at Pasuk Gimel, chapter 24, verse 3. The beginning of what Avram Avinu says to his servant, who I colloquially refer to as Eliezer, but last time we got together, we had a wide-ranging discussion about the fact that it never calls him that. Is that because it's self-effacing? Was his name actually Eliezer? Is that the servant in question? Chazal say it's the servant, if you will, rabbinic Occam's razor. If we have no reason to doubt it and there's not really conflicting information, so why not? Sure, it was Eliezer, and that's what Chazal say, that was his name. The whole discussion about his name, who is he really? Was he Canaan? Was he someone else? That he got the name Eliezer, of course, is so much going to be on display when we get to the point that he's at the well. Let's look though at the psukim themselves and see where we can go. Again, let's just for continuity's sake, why don't we read the whole parak from the beginning? It's only 2 more verses. So we learned already, not opening that up again. So I urge you, please don't ask me questions about that subject, not closed, but we got to move a little bit ahead. So we'll dial back after. Avraham, Zakein, Baba Yamim, Vashem, Beirachet Avram Bakol. Vayomer Avram el Avdo Zikan Beito Hamoshel B'chol Asher Lo Simna Yadcha Tachat Yirechi. Calls him in, place your hand under my thigh. Literal, euphemistic, whatever it is. This person on the level of Pshat is an important person in the household of Avram Avinu. We talked a lot about it last time. En Kamakum Maharich. Gimel. Va'ashbi'acha ba'Hashem elokei hashamayim v'elokei ha'aretz. Asher lo tikach isha livni mibnot ha'kna'ani asher anochi yoshev b'kirbo. I'll place you under oath, and it is by the God, by Hashem, who is the God of heaven and earth, that you shall not take a woman for my son, who is of the daughters of Canaan, wherein I dwell. Rather, ki el artzi ve'omoladati telech v'lakachta isha livni liyitzchak. You will go to my birthplace, to my land and my birthplace, reminiscent of the expression at the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha me'artzecha u'moladetcha u'mibeit avicha. Leave your land, your birthplace, your father's house. El artzi shar eka. Now we have a reversal. Ki el artzi ve'omoladati telech v'lakachta isha livni liyitzchak. Avram Avinu doesn't say here necessarily that it means from his father's house or anyone related to him, but that's what ends up happening. The question should fairly be asked, and I'm sure we all already thought about it previously. Why doesn't he want a daughter of Canaan to be taken for Yitzchak? What are possible reasons why he doesn't want that? That was an open-ended question. You could feel free to jump in. No ideas? What do you think?
A foreigner.
He's a foreigner.
Canaanites are
foreign, but he's related to people back in the old country, so better to go back there. Sort of a clan thing. Yeah?
Yeah.
What's interesting is, and let me sharpen a question. Shelley, you have an idea?
Maybe they're not such idol worshipers in back that they have a tradition, at least that there's a God who's head of the pantheon, even if they have more synergistic kind of stuff.
Syncretic, even if they have syncretic ideas, right? Excellent point also.
Abraham married, Sarah was a relative, right?
Yeah, Sarah's a relative. Sarah Zuyiska. If she is the same person, people, if the 2 names alternate, then Yiska is the daughter, it seems, of Haran.
Right. So he would, just like he took a wife from among his own people, he wants the same for his son.
Yeah, and it could be that's what's going on. Same kind of idea. Faith, go ahead, please.
If the daughter is from Canaan, then she'd be more likely to be influenced by her family. If the person is from far away, even if he had bad family ideas,
Another excellent idea. Shelley, please.
Um, I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but remember, Hagar takes a wife from Egypt for Ishmael, and that's where she's from. So maybe this was just what was done at the time. And we've noticed as we've been doing this, that the text is always saying that a different group of people are coming into Canaan. It's almost like Canaan is the Wild West, and there aren't a lot of people there. And it's being settled by different groups moving around there. So maybe they always go back to their own
ancestral lands of some sort.
Yeah.
Ancestral lands, right? So that very well could be it. And then you'll see that pattern often. Exactly. Now, what everyone's been saying here is actually one of the questions and some of the answers that some of the Mefarshei HaMikra themselves offer. Faith, your hand is still up. I'm going to guess that you already said your piece, but if you have something else to say, just unmute and talk. Otherwise, I'm slowing your hand. It's confusing for me who's who. Okay, but this is an important question, isn't it? Like, let me phrase it differently. Here's what I want to sharpen the question. In chapter 23, Perek Chav Gimel, we spent a long time studying it. So someone would say to you, well, what's the overarching theme? The theme is that Avram wants to purchase a burial plot for Sarah Imenu and to bury her in Eretz Canaan, and we can expand out from there. And he wants to purchase a portion of the plot of land in Eretz Yisrael, and he wants to secure the idea that they're connected to it. Same point. He can't afford to start bringing a body in antiquity yet up to some ancestral burial land elsewhere, even if he wanted to, right? It's like, how would that even work? So like, it's not embalming her, etc. So like, we got to bury her now. She died there. That's what the burial is going to be. So we need a spot. So we have an interaction of Avram Avinu with the people who live in Hebron. We have the townspeople, we have Ephron, we have the back and forth about Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. I am a stranger and a resident in your midst. The idea that Avram is in this place where they venerate him and he's a prince, he's so well regarded that they're, again, the level of pshat, even there are hints that it's not exactly so, but on the surface, it seems like, on the surface of pshat, a little deeper within pshat, maybe there's a little passive aggressive or like some ambivalence they have about him. But when you look at the psukim, it seems like they're falling all over themselves to want to honor him as the Nasi Elokim, and they'll take it for free. And it's right. There's something there that like they hold him in the highest esteem. So that's chapter 23. And Avram, of course, is saying, I'm going to buy it. And Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, which Ger v'toshav, I'm a stranger and a resident. Okay, well, it's a polarity. Which one do you want to put like in the balance and say I'm more this than that? It's like a hyphenated identity. I'm a resident alien. Well, which are you, a resident or an alien? Well, a little of both. In that chapter, it's not so clear. Now you come to chapter 24. What's Avram Avinu saying to his servant behind closed doors? You will not allow my son to marry with these people. I mean, last perek, maybe he wants to be part of them and holding him up, but behind closed doors, what's he saying? It doesn't sound good. He's telling him, I don't want to marry into these people. Well, why not? I mean, after all, this was the place where Avram Avinu had journeyed, where Hashem told him it would be better. I'll make your name great. That's the burial plot area because that's where you're living and that's where you want to have an impact, etc. Right? So, by the way, it's time to get married. So, what better way to influence the place than, and from obviously the aristocracy throughout the Middle Ages, this was how it was. Marry in to their way of life, but not really. It's really you're going to influence them. But how will you get there? You'll have to get married to someone in that family. Well, not really. And that's, we have to sort of reckon with why that would be. So some answers came up. One is maybe it's part of the clan in terms of We have precedent for it. Hagar Keturah, or rather Hagar Keturah taking a daughter of Mitzrayim for her son. She's from there. She takes the daughter for Yishmael. Maybe it's related in some way to the, I would say, the reality that there's as Shelley pointed out, the reality that at least back up in the old country, they believe in God. They also have other worship that they're doing there that's not healthy, to put it charitably. They're engaged in idolatry, but it's a syncretic form of worship. You're not totally out of sorts about the idea that there's a God who they've never heard of, who's the creator of Shemaim and Aretz, etc. Look what happens when Eliezer comes to the house and he has that conversation with them, right? And what do they say? Well, if it's from Hashem, what can we do? Now, that doesn't mean they were monotheists necessarily. It could be they believed in God, the most powerful, I guess. But as you said, as Shelley pointed out, there's a pantheon, and like you also have this little getchka and that little getchka, like all these little, like some of us have like little ornaments in a break front. Only for them, they're bowing down to them. Yeah, they're holding them in hand and they're using it as a prayer. I don't know what. That's idolatrous. But they also believe there's one God, but he's not one God. There's the God who's the most powerful, the supreme God. Or as Faith pointed out, well, what about the influence problem? If the girl comes from far away, the woman comes from far away, so we're not in the milieu of her family. If her family lives right here in town, min hastam, we're gonna have Thanksgiving together. We're gonna have Pesach together. We're gonna have to get together again. You know, then they're gonna have their holidays. He's gonna have to go there because we live together. That's not a bargain that Avram Avinu could abide, right? That's not something he was going to accept. Now, it turns out that these approaches are already, so, you know, we should maybe pat ourselves on the back a little bit as a group. We're thinking along the lines of how the Mefarshei HaMikra think. This was actually what the Kli Yakar writes. The Kli Yakar, in his Perush on this, actually says, you know, I don't understand. Why did he write, why does the Torah say, Lo tikach Hashem livni, mibnot haknani asher anochim yoshev b'kirbo, in whose midst I dwell? Well, where else? Of course, it's whose midst you dwell. You know, min hastam, you would say, well, he doesn't want to learn from the people of Canaan. He doesn't want to learn their way. The Torah later on will give an actual mitzvah prohibition: don't marry into those families, right? It's actually a mitzvah in the Torah. So it stands to reason that obviously we don't want to be in a situation where Avram Avinu keeps the whole Torah according to Chazal, where he's actually running afoul of that. But asks the Kli Yakar, well, yeah, the Benot, you know, Benot Lavanu Betuel, they're also over there Avodah Zarah, like the Canaanim. And, you know, from our perspective, you could say, well, better, instead of believing exclusively in idolatry, if you at least believe also in God. But that's also a problem, a very big problem. Yeah. So there's this issue, and we're going to see further along, it's also the issue of not allowing him to go back to live there. Obviously, the fact that I live in their midst, says the Kli Yakar, in the words of Avram Avinu, you know, or says Avram Avinu in the words of Kli Yakar, through the prison of Kli Yakar. It's obvious that if my son is going to marry a woman who's Canaanite, so since I live in their midst, so my son is going to live with them as much as he lives with me. My son will be on the Ger Toshav spectrum, I'm saying, much more in the Toshav part. We're not just that we bought a burial plot that's ours. It's almost like what people said to him, bury your loved one in the choicest of our sepulchers. What does that mean? When we bury her in our cemetery, she's our princess. Avram says, I want to talk to Ephron. It's wonderful what you're saying. I'm so happy that you feel so nicely about my wife, myself. We're going to take our own spot. We have to buy it. I insist. No, it's free. No, I insist. So here, this is by other means. It's another challenge. Right? The Kli Yakar's language, Mistama gam b'ni yagur etzlam. My son will have to live among them. Vaz yesh lachush shemi l'mod mimasem. He's going to learn their ways. But if he gets married to someone from Benot Lavan and Betuel, he's going to, and if he lives over there, he's also going to learn from them. So what happens? Avram says, Dirbalak, I think, is the proper slang, right, Sipora? Right, Ann? That's the proper slang in Israel today. He's not going to move there. She's going to have to come live in our family milieu, in our tents, in our place. Yeah. So neither can it be one of the children of Canaan, nor can it be that my son's going to go live out there. And if the woman comes to live in our family, there's no fear, right? That's one issue, right? And now another question is, what about the nature of the avot that carries forth to the banim? The parents convey to their children their values, their characteristics. Okay, well, if Rivka comes from a household, if this woman, I shouldn't say Rivka, comes from a household with this idolatry, back to square one. That's what she learned. That's what she knows. The Kli Yakar differentiates between the severity, oddly enough, not severe, severity is the wrong word, the staying power of eating foods that are abominable or engaging in morality that is itself askew, jealousies, etc., and all different kinds of negative attributes that are associated with, as the Kli Yakar writes, bechomer, with the material world, with a personal interaction. And I know, right away, everyone should be jumping on me and saying, well, wait a minute, there are certain things that Rivka did bring. There are certain things Rivka did bring from her parents' house. It's coming up in a few parshas afterwards. It's going to involve someone wearing something on his arms. Yeah, that is something that she did bring. Litza'arenu. There is something there. But the Kli Yakar says, the reality is, he says, that the deficits from a moral perspective that are interpersonal or that have to do with how one eats or how one engages in morality generally, that's much more of a communication from parents to children than avodah zarah. Why? Says the Kli Yakar, because avodah zarah is talui b'sichlo shel adam. It's connected to the mental process of a person, and therefore, since the belief, it's not communicated in such a strong way, parents to children. That's what he writes. 3 partners in every human being, based on the Gemara Masachet Sota. The material elements come from the father, come from the mother, and therefore all the Maaseh Avot that are connected to Chomer will be connected to the material world, will be inherited by the children. It's intergenerational. But he writes, I'm just reading you the words, Aval ha'emunah hi tluya b'sichlo shel adam. Since emunah is connected to the seichel, the intellect of a person, but a person is given by Hashem a neshama and a seichel, and why should that necessarily go from parents to children? And therefore, he pushed away the Knaanim, because the Knaanim had so many different averot connected to the material world, particularly in terms of sexual morality, by the by, shtufei zima, that's the language that he uses. But not so with regard to avodah zarah, which is true in the world of Lavan and Betuel. Even though there was avodah zarah there, he thought it would be easier in a way to wean Rivka Imenu off and away from that than from these other things. Shall I give me 1 minute? Give me 1 minute. But what does Rivka end up bringing into the house, of course, that she imported from the house of Lavan, which you could argue to the ends of the earth was a good thing or a bad thing. It's the way she applied it. We see what happened with the bracha, with Esav, with Yaakov, right? Where she's the mover and shaker, and she's telling him, here's how you do this. It was necessary, it was unnecessary, it was good, it was bad, I'm not dealing with that question, but the tactic, I know what to do. Rachel Imenu, what does she do? She takes the trufim of her father, debated among the Farshi Mikra, the trufim, according to Moshe Wolfson. I do not know if this is really parshanut or just homiletics and drush, but it's nice. He says the word trophy, like you get a prize for something, which he claims goes all the way back to antiquity. I didn't research it. And in antiquity, the trophy was always an idol. Therefore, today, when you win a prize in a competition, particularly a sports competition, what do you get? You get a trophy. Trafim. Look at that. It's a nice idea. I have no idea if it's actually accurate. I don't know. But Rachel takes the truffim from her father. Why'd she take them? Rashi, to wean him off of Avodah Zarah. She had the best of intentions. Other opinions? She wanted to make sure that he couldn't use his special methods to divine, small d, where they were. Couldn't guess, couldn't use his method, whatever these things are, right? Chapter, 35 in Vayishlach, Yaakov says to his family, he tells them, get rid of your foreign gods. He tells the whole family and the whole camp. He didn't really mean his own children. He didn't mean the wives. He meant the whatever it is. He meant the servants. He meant he is speaking to his family. He's speaking to everybody. But the reality is, like, okay, there is something there that's like a process that has to still be, call it refined or whatnot. There are elements that come into the mix. You know what I mean? There are elements come into the mix. I would throw into it, and I don't take this as being accurate. I'm just saying it's from Lavan's perspective. Lavan's go-to understanding of what happened with Yaakov's wealth while he worked for him. Lavan's understanding is, for sure, Yaakov is wily Jacob. For sure. And where did he learn that? He learned it from his mother, my sister. Like, for sure, that's the click, 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 click. You know, again, it's not Chalila to cast aspersions on Yaakov Avinu over there in that story, but there is a little bit of a, you know what I mean? Like, Rivka, you know, so there's like a tactic. So the Kli Yakar says, look, when it comes to emunot v'deyot, that can be changed. That she'll live in our milieu and she'll like Shabbos candles and, you know, and she'll bake the challah, she'll make challah Friday. That'll change. But if she has these other characteristics, that's going to be a big problem. You know, I thought it was a very nice idea, and it answers to some of these kinds of questions. Not everyone agreed to this. This is sort of the Kli Yakar's idea, is trying to understand. Okay, but what are you solving? What are you solving by not having her marry a Knaani? So again, it could be there's a clan thing in the families. In the olden days, you want to marry someone in the family because you know them, you're connected to them. You know, morality issues aside, but like people marrying cousins or more distant relatives, and it could be that it really is about something about education, influence, and or the fact that there's a syncretic belief in Haran. Syncretic, they believe in God, but they also on the side, you know, just in case, so to speak, they also have a fertility god and a this god and a that god, and that's idolatrous, obviously. But you know, maybe it's a better madrega than someone who doesn't even understand that there is one God who is supreme over all. Okay, Shelley, you've been waiting patiently. I'm sorry to keep you waiting. Go ahead.
Okay, 2 points. One is on the immorality thing. Okay, Canaan, we're told later in the Torah, don't do what they did in Canaan, don't do what they did in Egypt. We're told not to marry Canaanim. We're not told not to marry Egyptians. They can come in after the 3rd generation.
If they convert.
Yes, but Canaanim are not supposed to convert. We're supposed to get them out of there. We don't trust them to even convert. So that goes to say, if the immorality is the same thing, that's a problem with that. And then I hate to bring up the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, but I will. He thought that Bethuel was the king of his city, and he's the first one, according to the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, to institute the idea of droit de seigneur, which is also in medieval times, that the king or the duke or whatever gets to sleep with the bride first, that he gets to take her virginity, and that Abraham was very much afraid that this was going to happen to Rivka, that he would have to do it with his daughter because he instituted it, and everybody be mad if he didn't do it with his daughter. So I don't see if I believe that he'd be earlier than the Kli Yakar. I mean, he's pretty early. So the Kli Yakar would be familiar with him, and he would know that there are some commentators who don't buy that the family up in Haran was all that moral.
It's not. I'm sure that I know for a fact, no question, that the Kli Yakar knew this. The Kli Yakar understood this, but he chose not to go down that road for the simple reason that, and we've talked about this a few times already, just because the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says it does not mean it's not a psak. It's not when the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is being written, it's not being written as this is the sidebar commentary of historically how things were. It's not clear. In other words, Kliaka says, yeah, that's one perush. I have another idea. Now, he didn't make it up as a flight of fancy. He is trying to understand it based also on the text of what's written in the Perek, etc., and in the Torah generally. And that's okay. He doesn't have to accept that is what Betuel is about, or that's what's actually happening in that town. It's not. It could be, but it's not a foregone conclusion that it must be. You understand? This is what we keep going around and around about medrash in general, is that it's not clear when you read a medrash that you have to accept that it means literally this thing happened as a historical piece. It could be, it's a lesson that we're learning that we're meant to take with us. Yeah.
So we have a problem with this. Like we do with a lot of issues, is we don't have a clear answer. It doesn't work for the idolatry totally, and it doesn't work for the immorality totally. And yet the plot is that you can't
said
a woman from there.
Yeah, that's the pshat. What's left up to interpretation, it's just the way it is. I mean,
well, we always want to know why. We
yes.
can't help we're not going to not ask the question and just accept this is the way it is, because if this is not a history book like everybody's always telling me, then there's a reason for it, and there's something we're supposed to learn in our own lives or in the history of the Jewish people, and therefore we have to ask these questions and we have to answer them.
We have to ask these questions. We have to try to come up with answers. There is no guarantee that we're going to come up with answers. And I would submit that here's a great example. It's this parak. It's the last parak. It's a story. And it's left open to like multiple understanding at different levels. And it's not that you have to vote like this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing, as long as they're all sourced in the world of Torah, which means that it's based on something that's actually written there. It's not Megal upon B'Torah Shlo Kal Halacha. Like a person can't come and say, well, you know what Avinu's main motivation was? Like he thought he would get more money out of the people in Haran. Like what? You can't. This doesn't made up. It's not related to anything in the theme of the story. It was just a flight of fancy. You know what I mean? Like he thought the people there had a better tan. Like that's preposterous. He thought they had better genetics. On what basis did you say it? You have to explain why. So everybody's trying to understand like what's the issue? What's the issue? And for the Kli Yakar, the issue is influence from parents to children and how families live. We're going to see the Ramban in a minute. It's going to tie into a conversation I had with someone who's on this call. I won't out them, but a conversation I had with someone on this call within the last few days. It's going to bring up a source that is on the side, had a conversation with someone. But okay, Karen, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, oh, wait. I'll move the hand in a minute. As we're talking, I'm thinking of Rambam, who is the ultimate rationalist.
Yeah.
And his thing is you go as far as you possibly can go to try and understand things. But then Rambam also had the principles of faith, because there were areas where he just, if you study all of his works, you see he hits a wall. And if he can't get through the wall, then it's an issue of faith. So that's what we're struggling with all the time here. We're trying to figure out where are the walls as we're learning.
Yeah. Agreed. And that's part of the journey. You know what I mean? And that's what you're saying, basically.
That's it. That's exactly it. You go as far as you possibly can go, then you push a little more and you push a little more. And if it's a wall, then at that point you can say it's a wall, but you're forced to go as far as you possibly can. Yeah. Well said.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Let me, I want to show you something that is the Ramban's approach, which I I hope we can get through it. I have about 13 minutes left, so bear with me. But I hope it'll be helpful and elucidating in terms of not only the pshat, but also some issues that are maybe a little bit controversial in the Ramban himself. But to do that, actually, I forgot. We have to look at a few more psukim. I'm sorry. If you keep going in the psukim, verse 4, ki el artziv el moladati telech lekachti shalif nu litzchak, pasuk hey, vayomer elav ha'eved ulayt lo toveh ha'isha lalechet acharai, el ha'aretz hazot ha'ashev ashiv et bincha el ha'aretz asher yatzat misham. If the woman refuses to arrive and to go with us, so should I take him back up there? Answer, to the place that you came from. Vayomer elav Abraham, he shamer lechapen teshiva b'ni shama. You beware lest you bring my son back there. Now, why are all these instructions? The pshat is Avram's worried he's going to die while Eliezer is out there. And if he dies, Eliezer is going to have to make some kind of decision. So that's the purpose of the oath. I'm not going to be here to walk you through it. This is what must happen, which is what must not happen. Pasuk Zayin. Hashem Elokei Hashemayim, asher lekachani beit avi me'eretz molati v'asher diber li v'asher nishba li lemor l'zarcha etin ha'aretz hazot v'yishlach malacho lefanecha v'lakach isha livni misham. Just learn a slew of psukim. To put it very simply, he puts them under oath. But look at verse 7. He refers to God as Hashem, the God of Shemayim, who took me out of the house of my father and from my birthplace. Rashi notes that back in verse 3, which we started with today, we had the expression Elokei ha'aretz, Elokei hashamayim, Elokei ha'aretz, the God of heaven and the God of earth. Now we just have the God of heaven. So explains Rashi, based on the Sifri, based on Breisheet Rabbah, that now when I put you under oath, in verse 3, I'm putting under oath my servant by the name of the God of heaven and the God of earth. But when I tell the story about how I got here, I need to refer to Hashem as just the God of heaven and not the God of earth. You know why? Because in those days, Hashem was only the God of heaven. In order for God to be the God of earth, not that he's not really, but Rashi writes, Shehir galti b'fia briot, I caused other people now to know about Hashem. But when he took me from my father's house, nobody in the world recognized God. His name was not known in the land. It's a beautiful idea. Elokei hashamayim v'ha'aretz, Elokei ha'aretz, that's now. Thanks to our actions, our bringing God's name into the world, now God is known in the world. But when he took me out, God's name was not known in the world. So that's the shift. For Rashi, it's about Avram, what Avram Avinu did. The Ramban sees a little bit differently. I put him on the screen, and I warn you in advance, viewer discretion advised. I'm gonna ask, just please not for comments and questions the next 10 minutes. I must focus on this. I don't want to get it wrong because we're going to be dealing with some nitroglycerin potentially. So listen carefully to how this goes. Elokei Hashem Elokei ha'aretz, back in verse 3. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Ramban, Yikarei Elokei Eretz Yisrael. God is referred to as the God of the land of Israel. The God of heaven, the God of earth, doesn't mean heaven and earth, because he's only in heaven, but not on earth until people know about him. Again, that's figurative language. Hashem obviously is Elokei Hashem Elokei ha'aretz all the time. Rashi was just answering, why is there a shift in language? But God is the God of the land of Israel. Kidichtiv liyadu et mishpat Elokei ha'aretz, v'katuv v'dabru el Elohei Yishalayim ke'Elohei amei ha'aretz. And he says, look, there's a secret about this, and I'm going to tell you the secret a little bit later. I'm not telling it to you now. It's in the book of Vayikra. It's a little secret. But I have a secret to share, a sod. Verse 7, Lo ne'amar b'Elokei ha'aretz, it only said Elokei hashamayim. You know why? Ki haya b'charan b'Ur Kasdim. Because Avram was in Haran or in Ur Kasdim. There's a whole debate. Where is he when God tells him? Ramban thinks he was in Haran, but Ibn Ezra and others think he was in Ur Kasdim when God told him, Lech l'me artzecha. So therefore, it's only Elokei hashamayim, Elokei ha'aretz. You know what ha'aretz means? It means Eretz Yisrael. V'chein amru, and take this line as it's understood in context. Don't take it out of context, right? Understand, Chazal said it, Ramban who lived almost his entire life in Chutz La'aretz, who knew that he left behind beautiful communities, and Yidden for 2,000 years who've been learning these lines and going back to them from the Gemara and understanding them. since the Gullus happened, and it's not meant to be taken literally. Okay, we shouldn't take it literally. Should be beating ourselves up, but to understand from Avram's perspective, what Avram understands in the world around him, and it just so happens we get this bingo. I just had this conversation in other contexts with someone within the last few days. Staggering. V'chein Amar, what does the Gemara say in Ketubot? A very shocking statement. Hadar b'chutz la'aretz domer k'mi she'ein lo Eloah. A person who lives outside the land, it's as if they don't have a God. Hayitachen? Shneimar, as it says, Ki gershuna yom mistaper b'nachal Hashem lemor lechavod Elohim acherim. Right? That's David HaMelech on the run when he goes to live with Achish Melech Gat, and they threw me out, to be able to live in the heritage of God, and they basically said, go worship another God. Now, I'll start with the end in mind. The great revolution of Klal Yisrael, the great miracle of Klal Yisrael, is unlike all the other peoples of antiquity, where their religion was bound up with a place and it was the god of the area. Our whole raison d'etre, if you will, is that even when we're outside of the place, our connection to Hashem did not dissipate and disappear. That we were able to move all over the world. And you know what Chazal say? I mean, again, you want to take one Mamar Chazal, take it out of context, and say, you're a bunch of sinners. What are you going to do with 2,000 years of all these people? Rashi, who never stepped into Eretz Yisrael, and the aforementioned Kli Yakar, and the Rambam who passed through but didn't live there, and the Ritva, and the Rashba, and the Ran, and the Rabbeinu Yonah. I mean, you just keep going and going and going. You actually have a preponderance of the greats of the last 2,000 years. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe Zechuta Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, and the Rav, and Rav Moshe, and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, and Rav Aaron Kota. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on and on. So please, but what's the point? We went into Galut, and the nation said, it's over. They can't survive this way. And what did we do? Dafka, we survived. Dafka, the Shechina, according to the Midrashim, comes with us. Dafka, we build houses, we build yeshivas, we build mosdos, we build kolulim, we build shuls. But we never gave up the idea that we're going back there. And we have reasons. Maybe they're tirutzim, the rationalizations, whatever it is. Maybe we're here on shlichut. Maybe it's an extended shlichut. There could be all different reasons. It's very complicated. We understand. The Ramban wants the Jewish people to be reminded in his time that for Avram Avinu, where is God Elokei Haaretz? In Eretz Yisrael. And all things being equal, I mean, that is our view at Adayom Hazeh. That's what it means. Mashiach will come. That's what we're talking about. The debate is, so is now the time? Is now not the time? Ideologically speaking, there's a question. Sometimes there are family reasons. There could be a million different, right? Not a million, but there are many, many reasons. And to understand the Ramban there, if he says, that's my answer. When he's talking to Eliezer, he's telling, or Eved Avram, I keep saying, again, colloquially, they call him Eliezer. He told him, I'm putting you under oath, the Elokei Hashem Elokei Haaretz, this land. Eretz Yisrael, where we are right now. But when God took me out, he was the Elokei Hashemayim. Because the nature of the Shechina in Chutz La'aretz is absolutely not the same thing as what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. It's just not. Now, this is a pretty hyperbolic statement. If you live in Chutz La'aretz, it's like you don't have a God. Remember that we're learning, many of us, something called the Talmud Bavli. You know where it was written, yeah? So Ravine and Ravashi, and you can just keep going, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of names. So, like, this is nitro. Like, what's going on? The Ramban has a very lengthy essay. Lengthy. It runs this whole thing in chapter 18 of Sefer Vayikra. I can't possibly do it justice in the allotted time. There's just no way. It's in the section, if you want to look it up, in the parsha of the Arayot, of the forbidden relationships. Don't do like they did in Egypt. Don't do like they do in Canaan, right? Where you came from and where you're going to. When the Jewish people would get the Torah, they're in the midbar, in between. Mitzrayim, you saw a model? No, not that one. You're going to Canaan? No, don't emulate them. You have to be yourselves and your own value system, in other words. There's a whole explanation, but one of the things that happens in that chapter is it describes that if the Jewish people, lo aleinu, fall into immorality, sexual immorality, relationships, forbidden relationships, and the like, God says the land itself will become polluted, defiled, impure, vatitma, tamei, and that tuma will eventually cause the Almighty to call it to account and the land will throw you out. It will spit you, it will vomit you out. It will vomit you out. Yeah. So it's really quite something. That the land, as if it was like animated, it will throw you, and you can't abide idolatry, adultery and other forms of immorality. So the Ramban, again, Ramban is he's the Ramban. It's, you know, he says, obviously, God is the God of the entire world. You live wherever you live, Timbuktu. God is the God there. Aval Eretz Yisrael. It is a special place. It's the heritage place of God. It is designated for his name, for his name's sake. It's on a higher level spiritually. He goes on to describe, if we have, as the Ramban does, much more of a federal understanding of how things work in Shemayim. So there isn't an angel in the grand parliament in Shemayim. Again, it's not literal, but of course, that there isn't a malach in charge of the country. Now, there are malachim for each country, like a lahavdal, fe'avdal, a United Nations on high, not a corrupt United Nations like we have here, not a horrific one that so often we have here, but the one in Malchut Shemayim, Malya Shemayla. And there's a direct connection between Hashem and Eretz Yisrael. And the point is, of course, God is everywhere, but the relationship of Hashem to the land of Israel and to the Jewish people in the land of Israel is unlike it is anywhere else in the world. And therefore, the sensitivity, spiritual sensitivity of that place is much more finely attuned and balanced. And that's why it refers to, and therefore he says, and therefore you have the idea of, well, you shouldn't do, you're not allowed to do adultery or immorality anywhere. Yeah, but there's something special about the land of Israel. In the land of Israel, it's even worse, Ojoter Garua, because it's Eretz Yisrael. It's not like the rest of the world. And the place itself, right, anyone who defiles it, it will not abide. It will not abide idolatry and those who engage in immorality. It just won't. It's going to throw you out. So, and therefore it mentions Molech in this section in Sefer Vayikra, et cetera, okay? And here's the controversial part, as if it wasn't already, the Ramban goes on to describe here that in Chutz La'aretz, even though you're doing everything for the sake of Hashem, you can't come to a full level of purity. You just can't, because of who's actually running things from a spiritual perspective, and the fact that the nations are there, and who they wander after their own leadership, etc. Right? And the idea that God is actually on top of everything, etc. But there's more distance. There's just more distance, spiritually speaking, between Hashem and the Jewish people when they're in Galut. That's what it means. It has their panim, right? It's all these different things. So it goes on to describe that this is, and he quotes the same Gemara. If you're outside, it's like you don't have a God. Mamash, like, oh, great, we're outside. That is exactly the mistake of so many peoples of antiquity, that Davka, our Nevi'im, and our tradition and our Chachamim and the whole thing is like, no, just it's terrible not to live in Eretz Yisrael. There's a galut. What can we do? It's how our families got here. It's much more complicated for many of us to just pick up and go, right? There's so many labyrinthine reasons that, again, and some would argue those are all tirutzim in our time. It is at least a cheshbon nefesh. I say all the time for myself. A person has to do for themselves. Like, why am I here? Can I justify it? What am I doing here? Okay, nicha. Granted, am I in education? Am I contributing to the community? Am I doing something? Do I have family? Do I have economic challenges? Whatever the issues are. But we should also realize, and that's the Ramban's point, be super careful to realize that Eretz Yisrael is special and differentiated and doesn't work the same way. And by the way, it doesn't mean there is no God. It means, where's that line? Domeh, kimi. It's like. Now, okay, it doesn't literally mean it that way. And he goes on to describe, that's why the Torah says, if you do the wrong thing, so we're reading it every day, you'll be lost quickly from the land of Israel, right? So I'm gonna send you out. But this is astounding. This Ramban, very controversial. He basically says, even though I'm throwing you out in second parsha of Shema, Vayem Shema Tishma'u, even though I'm sending you out because you didn't do the right thing, even though Galut, I exile you, you should still do all the mitzvahs. It's very important to the mitzvahs. You know why? So when you get back to the land of Israel, they will not be new for you. Now, the Ramban's not claiming, okay, so don't do mitzvahs. It's like it's all, they'll just practice. The point is it's not going to be on the same level as when you do those same mitzvot in Eretz Yisrael, right? That's the idea, right? And the galut, the exile, where will it mostly be manifest? The mitzvahs you can't do are mitzvot generally, mitzvot tluyat ba'aretz. Just doesn't work because you're not in the land. So you're missing part of the mitzvahs you can do, but there's still mitzvahs that are mitzvot haguf that you have to do. So that's where the examples that are given are, again, Talmud Torah and Tefillin and mezuzah, like it's bodily mitzvahs, spatial mitzvahs, etc. That you're going to keep going with. And by the way, he explains that's the mitzvah of Yaakov Avinu that he says to his household and everyone who's with him when they come back to the land of Israel. They lived in exile. Hasirot Elohei hanecha shebtucham taharu. You better get rid of your foreign gods that are in your midst and purify yourselves. Now, was he talking? Now, that's why he talked to his family and to all the people who were with him in case, because even if there was a way that it might be, maybe could get some kind of a pass in Chutz La'aretz, when he got to the land of Israel, it wasn't going to work. And therefore, Rachel died when they came into the land, says the Ramban. Not everyone agrees. That, actually, I can get to you in a second, that in Chutz La'aretz, she wasn't going to die. The Torah says a man's not to be married to two sisters. The Torah hadn't been given yet, which is what most commentators say, so he wasn't really obligated. But the Ramban says, yeah, but they came to Eretz Yisrael, her days were numbered automatically because that's something that Eretz Yisrael can't abide. It's a very challenging idea, yeah? But to sum it up, to the Ramban, when it says Hashemayim v'ha'aretz, it means Eretz Yisrael. And he goes on, there's a whole essay here. He talks about, Eretz Yerushalayim, connected Yerushalayim, Shamala, the two are interwoven with each other, and again, the whole piece here about how bound up it is with the notion of particularly morality, interpersonal morality, as the barometer for whether the Jewish people get to stay in the land, etc. And so on and so forth. Again, I have more to say on it. We didn't read line by line. I gave you sort of the executive summary of the Ramban. Let me take a few questions, comments, and then I'll let everybody go. Shelley, please go ahead.
Okay, I remember when we did the business with David saying that he'd be outside the land and he wouldn't be a god. And I remember how you explained it then. And it was just so, it really just hit home the idea that once you're outside of the land, it's somebody else's holidays, it's somebody else's God, it's somebody else's money. And this close to somebody else's holidays, we can certainly see it. I got certain songs that I didn't sing as a kid going to public school. I've got them all through my head. I know them in English. I know them in French, even though I never, I never sang them. It's my brain. I'd love to get rid of them all these years later. I can't. So that's what this all means. And so I don't have a problem with the Ramban at all.
Wow. I love what you're saying. I'm going to interject one thing. And that is, this is what the Chachamim refer to. It's good for this week, a good Dvar Torah. The Erso Shal Nachash, the venom of the viper, of the snake, the primordial snake. That once it gets in, it's very hard to get it out.
Yes.
Yeah. I think all of us can relate to that. And I'll say something autobiographical as well in this regard, although I was very fortunate to be able to go to Jewish schools and the like. But I find in corporate America, in commercial America, anytime from the end of November, maybe sometimes from October through the end of December, I walk into a store and I want to put on noise canceling headphones because for 25 minutes or an hour afterward, I'm still jingling away. You know what I'm saying? From being in the store, I'm like, I just went to go get to buy some regular product, and I got all these songs going in my head. Right? There is certain staying power, and that is along the lines, I think, of what the Ramban is referring to. But his point was that the calibration of connection to Hashem and Eretz Yisrael is unlike the rest of the world, and that carries with it the great merit of being connected, but the great and awesome responsibility that if things run off the rails from the perspective of morality, whether that's morality in relationships or morality in relationship with Hashem, in terms of idolatry, that the major lo aleinu, terrible consequence, Rahman al-Litzlan, God should save from such a thing, is exile from the place. And that's these harsh statements are less about saying, we're wagging a finger at the people who are not yet making aliyah and more about saying this is not something you want to cause to happen, an exile, in other words. And it's not something you want to be in a situation where you think that I could live here, I could live there. Acapulco is very nice. Bermuda is very nice. Peru is very, it's like, no, this is Eretz Yisrael. That's a particular character. And Ramban thinks that's what Avram Avinu was telling his servant. I'm putting under oath by the Elokei Hashem, Elokei Haaretz. But when you get there, Hashem is just Elokei Hashemayim. You could bring back in Rashi because the people don't speak about God. But also there's something else that, like, you're not living it as much, right? And in the same way, again, you know, and you have to be super careful when you say it and how you say such a thing. The tone is incredibly important, as someone on this call and I discussed not too long ago, because we're talking about really 20 centuries of Jewish people, many from the greatest minds, the greatest, and you know, be careful how you, you know, with a broad brush, tar everybody. It's not a good idea. Anyway, but okay, we learned some of these themes. Next week, no shear, back again in 2 weeks. What is it, January 2nd? 3rd, January 3rd, Monday, January 3rd. We'll resume and we'll pick it up from there. I'll let everybody go. Have a great day.